So this is news from a few days ago that I see a lot of people talking about, especially in the Star Wars community on YouTube. It came out from a new coffee table book about George's experience working on the prequels. So Flickering Myth covered it. It's in this article called George Lucas discusses his original Star Wars sequel trilogy plans, including Darth Maul and Darth Talon. I'm already interested. So this basically puts to bed the idea that George had really any creative pull on the sequel trilogy as it is now. So let's see. It says, when George Lucas first handed over the keys to Lucasfilm to the Walt Disney Company, he did so with detailed plans already thrashed out for episodes 7, 8, and 9 of the Star Wars saga. Yeah, we knew that back in 2012 when Disney bought it that he had plans for the trilogy, and apparently they just threw them out. Now, there's some fans out there that insist that George had more involvement than he actually did, and this, combined with Daisy Ridley saying that there was no plan for this trilogy, basically puts that whole thing to rest. And then it continues, however, Lucas's vision for the sequel trilogy didn't fit with the direction that Disney wanted to take the franchise, and his ideas were ultimately thrown out by the studio in favor of what eventually became The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, but I'm going to get to it, but some of these ideas I don't understand the mentality of why they threw them out. The only thing I can think of why they possibly did is it seems to have a lot of ties to the prequels, and they know that the prequels are pretty divisive. I can just imagine some boardroom with all these bigwigs with smoking cigars being like, people don't like the prequels, so let's just focus on OT characters and pretend the prequels don't exist. Well, in more recent years, it seems like they're embracing the prequels. Given the overall reception to Disney's sequels and the growing appreciation for Lucas's prequel trilogy, well, I don't know if it's growing. I mean, I feel like there's just, I guess it's kind of a cult following for the prequels, because there was a whole generation that grew up with them, and say what you will about them, and yes, they're flawed. Everyone can see that. But the ideas were there. I mean, George is a great ideas guy. He just needs people around him that know how to direct and write. There's naturally been much interest in the Star Wars creators' original plans. Yes, there is, to wrap up the saga. And now, thanks to the new coffee table book, The Star Wars Archives, 1999 to 2005, we have some insight direct from George himself, including the reveal that Darth Maul would have been the main antagonist along with another Sith Lord direct from the books. So he says, I had planned for the first trilogy to be about the father, the second trilogy to be about the son, and the third trilogy to be about the daughter and the grandchildren. Yeah, I think all of us assumed that was his plan. Because, where would the natural next step go after a story about the son? It would be about the grandchildren. And that lines up with some of the concept art from the art book for Episode 7. Episodes 7, 8, and 9 would take ideas from what happened after the Iraq War, said Lucas, via IO9. Okay, you fought the war, you killed everybody, now what are you going to do? Rebuilding afterwards is harder than starting a rebellion or fighting the war. When you win the war and you disband the opposing army, what do? The stormtroopers be like Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist fighters that joined ISIS and kept on fighting. The stormtroopers refuse to give up the Republic when the Republic win. Yeah, that sounds way more interesting than, I think, just the status quo, again, of there being a quasi-empire in the form of the First Order and a resistance, which, I mean, it's not really explained in the movies, but yes, the resistance, it doesn't make sense that it's called the resistance, except for the fact that there's this whole backstory about Leia, warning them about the First Order, and then people not believing her, so she has to, break away from the New Republic. It's all overcomplicated, and I don't know why they needed to do that. I think just to make Leia the general, which I still don't understand why she's general and not back in politics, but that's for another discussion. They want to be stormtroopers forever, so they go to a far corner of the galaxy, start their own country and their own rebellion. See, that sounds awesome. I want to see that. That's so cool. There's a power vacuum, so gangsters like the Hutts are taking advantage of the situation, and there is chaos, Lucas continued. The key person is Darth Maul, who had been resurrected in the Clone Wars. He brings all the gangs together. Maul's very old, and we have two versions of him. One is with a set of cybernetic legs like a spider, which we saw in Clone Wars. And then later on he has metal legs, and he was a little bit bigger, more of a superhero. We did all of this in the animated series. He was in a bunch of episodes. So, presumably, if Dave Filoni hadn't killed him off in Rebels, which, although I do like how that played out, how he died in that, he could have kept, I mean, we don't know how long Dathomirians live, so we could have seen him be, really old and basically be the new emperor, which sounds really cool. It would bring the whole saga full circle. You start with Darth Maul, and he returns, and he becomes like a major player. And I think he even admitted that if he had known how popular he would have been, he probably would have made him the villain of the first 3 movies instead of having Count Dooku in 2 of the 3. So yeah, there's artwork of Darth Maul and Darth Talon, and Darth Talon is from the comics, I believe, and something tells me that Disney wouldn't be okay with how risque of a character she is. I mean, you see how Disney can be with stuff like that. So I have the feeling that Disney was like, oh, heck no, we're not going to do a character like that. And George said that he actually likes the character in like kind of a creepy way, which is kind of funny. Lucas went on to explain that Maul would not have been the only villain, as Lucas would have drawn from the expanded universe. And see, that's the thing. George had respect for the EU, and he actually took things from the EU and canonized them, things that he liked. So he was not opposed to drawing from the EU, and then Disney came in and nuked it because they wanted to establish their own canon. What was I saying? And in particularly, that's a typo. It should be, and in particular, the Star Wars Legacy comic book series by incorporated the Twi'lek Sith Lord Darth Talon. He says, Darth Maul trained a girl, Darth Talon, who was in the comic books as his apprentice, Lucas explained. She was the new Darth Vader, and most of the action was with her. So these were the 2 main villains of the trilogy. Maul eventually becomes the godfather of crime in the universe because as the Empire falls, he takes over. The movies are about how Leia, I mean, who else is going to be the leader, trying to build the Republic. They still have the apparatus of the Republic, but they have to get it under control from the gangsters. That was the main story. See, this sounds awesome. It kind of makes me mad that Disney just threw it out because they wanted to bank on nostalgia. I understand that they had to do it. They had to set it 30 years later if they wanted to have the 3 main actors return because of how old they are in real life. But I think there could have been a way to still do this story and have them be that old. Like, think about how different the reception would have been if Rey's character instead was Darth Talon. Like, that would have been so cool to have Darth Talon be the main character, but you don't realize she's evil in the first movie until halfway through or something. I don't know. It just sounds new and interesting. Like, instead of just JJ rehashing episode 4, this, I think, would have been a pretty cool alternative. The thing is, though, I think some of this can still be done. Like, because we have the sequel trilogy, I think that because there's still the 30-year gap, I think some of this story, I mean, obviously Maul is dead. Maybe they could retcon that episode of Rebels and bring him back. I don't know. But you could still bring in Darth Talon. I think some of this story could still play out on certain series that they make for Disney Plus or a movie or something like that, or a couple of movies. So some of this could still see the light of day because, I mean, we saw his crime empire in Clone Wars, and then we saw, like, him going from the spider legs to the regular metal legs, and then you see him with the cameo in Solo, and he's still creating a crime empire. So if it feels like George was heading that way with him. And then the article finishes with, as for how things would have ultimately turned out, Lucas added that by the end of the trilogy, Luke would have rebuilt much of the Jedi, which we wanted to see, and we would have the renewal of the New Republic, with Leia, Senator Organa, becoming the Supreme Chancellor in charge of everything, so she ended up being the chosen one. I think I'm a little confused by that, because didn't George never really has specified who the chosen one actually is, has he? It started as Anakin, and then he kind of implied Luke. But making it Leia, to me, doesn't really make much sense, because Vader was the one that actually turned and overthrew the Empire, so I feel like he's still the chosen one. I don't know what would make Leia the chosen one. Yeah, she could be, like, I had an idea that she would basically start a new colony called New Alderaan, where, like, all the people that survived Alderaan, I mean, obviously no one on it survived, but Alderaanians that were elsewhere in the galaxy when it blew up, they all come back together and form a colony, and she could be like the viceroy or the prime minister or whatever of that planet, and then she's also Queen Leia, or like she's head of the New Republic. I think that makes more sense than her being a general. Like, to me, Han would have made more sense as a general. But again, I think a lot of this can still be done, and I hope that they do incorporate a lot of it into their projects that they're making that are set between Episode 6 and the Sequel Trilogy. So what do you guys think of all this stuff? Do you wish we would have got the Sequel Trilogy? Do you like the fact or like what we got with the Sequel Trilogy? Do you think some of this can still be incorporated into something? Let me know in the comments what you think of all this. And if you'd like my coverage on anything Star Wars, and I'm probably going to do other stuff besides just Star Wars, but that's what I'm mainly going to cover. If you like any of this and you like my ongoing breakdowns of the Mandalorian episodes, and I'm going to have the next one soon, then consider subscribing, liking, sharing, all that jazz. And thank you very much for watching.